lot of people don't really understand the fundamental basis of the Jewish state. Is the Holocaust, is it Jewish history? How do all these parts tie in?
Well, it's first of all Jewish history. We came here, the Jewish people came here with Abraham. Remember Abraham from the Bible? Abraham, Isaac, Jacob? Well, they came here about 3,500 years ago. And this has been our land, the one we've been attached to, for 3,500 years. Jerusalem, our capital, 3,000 years. So we basically survived here, thrived here, struggled here for about 2,000 years of these 3,500 years. And then we were kicked out. People think we were kicked out by the Romans. No, they destroyed Jerusalem, but we still hung around. But around between the 7th and 9th century in the Arab conquest, we depleted from our land. We lost our land. A lot of people lost their lands. It can happen. But we didn't give up on the dream of coming back to our land and reconstituting our national life, okay? And so we constantly said, next year in Jerusalem, next year in Jerusalem. We wanted to come back. We did come back, dripping first, and then much more greater numbers in the 19th century. And in the 20th century, we reformed the state of Israel. So we defeat the laws of history. The laws of history say you can't come back from expulsion, dispersion, exiles, massacre. You can't. But we did. And we came back and reconstituted this extraordinary state that not only serves the Jewish people, but also its non-Jewish citizens who have the best standard of living and the only ones who enjoy any civil rights, equal rights, in a very broad radius in the Middle East. I don't know if the Middle East will change. It is changing. We can talk about it. But the state of Israel, I would say, is like a parable that people can overcome the worst odds in history and could fashion a future of brilliance and hope against the overwhelming odds. I think that's the story of Israel. It gives hope to millions, maybe not to a small branch in the college campuses of the United States, but millions, hundreds of millions, I would say even billions of people in India and in Asia and in Africa and in Latin America. They understand that Israel gives hope to humanity. It says, you can do it. That sounds like a yes, we can.
So your family history in the state of Israel is amazing. It goes back several generations at this point, and it really starts with your father, who is deeply involved in the Zionist movement and who actually spoke with a lot of very prominent figures in the United States throughout the 1950s. You were telling me before the show that he actually had a meeting with President Eisenhower at one point.
Yes, he did. But before that, I'll tell you that my father, at the age of 23, in 1933, wrote that the Holocaust, that's the word he used, the Holocaust, will threaten not only the survival of the Jewish people, but the peace of the world everywhere. That if rampant anti-Semitism that the Nazis were promoting in 1933, the month that Hitler rose, if that is not opposed, it will sweep and engulf the entire world. So he was not bad for a 23-year-old. He was prescient. He thought that we would be imperiled if we don't have a state to stop, to get the Jews out from Europe, the Jewish people from Europe. They would be destroyed by Nazism. So he wanted to persuade the world that there's a need to make the Jewish state. He went to Jabotinsky, who was the founder of my movement. He was 60 years old. He was in London, and he was agitating to persuade Britain to recognize a Jewish state, which they refused to do. They closed the gates of this country. They wouldn't allow Jewish immigration. They were against the Arabs. And my father went to Jabotinsky in London. He said, "You have the right idea, but you're in the wrong place." And he said, "Why?" He said, "Because you should be in America." He said, "Why America?" He said, "Because America will be the rising power in the world. There may be a world conflict. America will emerge as the great power, and America can make Britain do what Britain doesn't want to do. That is, recognize a Jewish state." Well, they went to America. Jabotinsky died, and my father continued alone during the during the war years, agitating for Zionism. He was all of 32. And he began, that's in 1942. He decided to do something that no Jewish leader did before. He went to the Republicans. And he went to Senator Taft, who was a very great senator, because Roosevelt would not hear of a Jewish state. He was absolutely opposed to it. He didn't want to antagonize the British. He thought that the British wanted to cater to the Arabs. He simply would not do it. He was a great leader, but it was For the Jewish people, that wasn't good. So not being able to persuade the Democrats, he went to the Republicans. And he said to Senator Taft to advocate, to put in the Republican National Convention on the platform, support for unrestricted Jewish immigration in a Jewish state. Well, Roosevelt didn't like it, but 3 months later, he had no choice. The Democratic National Convention adopted a similar platform. So in many ways, my father was the progenitor of the bipartisan American support for Israel. But of course, he didn't just work on public opinion, but he worked also on the generals and on the politicians, and he went from one to the other. Claire Booth Luce, the wife of the publisher of Time magazine, who was a congresswoman, brilliant woman, she opened doors for him. And so he was taken first to the lowest official in the State Department. His name was Loy Henderson. He was responsible for the Middle East. And they started bringing him up. They brought him to Dean Acheson, who was the acting Secretary of State. And eventually they brought him to Eisenhower. After the war, he was the commander of the army. Okay? And they heard from him something that they never heard before. Never heard before. And Eisenhower asked him, why should we support you? He said, because the war has ended. The Soviet Union is going to walk into the Middle East. The Arab countries are not only not going to be an obstacle, they'll cooperate with them. And we, in the Jewish state of Israel, will be the bastion of the West, bastion of Western interests and Western values in the heart of the Middle East to block the Soviet takeover of the Middle East. And Eisenhower looked at him. Eisenhower was my father describes him as a sort of very open-minded, very logical American patriot. So he asked him, how are you going to be the bastion? You're only 600,000. And my father said to him, General, you've just seen in 2 world wars how we Jews fight for others. Can you imagine how strong we'll be when we fight for ourselves? Well, Eisenhower was very much impressed by that because he got the whole general staff for a second meeting with my father. And he wanted to have a third meeting with the British envoy to persuade Britain to change their attitudes. The Brits nixed that, but it tells you his perspective. You work on public opinion and you work on the officials. Public opinion, you appeal to justice. Officials, you appeal to interests. And the two merge.
Well, obviously, you've taken up a lot of those lessons in your own career. So you can see the transition and the transformation of the state of Israel. I've only visited the state of Israel 4 times over the course of my life. I visited first in 2000. It was during the Second Intifada. And then I visited when I got married in 2008. And I visited 3 years ago and now. And you can see the massive transformations that have happened over the course of that time period, in large part thanks to the fact that you, as the finance minister and then as the prime minister, made such economic decisions in the state of Israel. The growth here is just extraordinary.
Well, the first thing I look at it when I land in any country, and I can tell you immediately what their GDP per capita is, I look at the roads and I look at the cranes. In Israel, you can see a lot of that. But of course, the high tech and the other things that are happening here are mesmerizing. I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, but the 2 most robust centers of innovation in the world today are Miami. No offense to Silicon Valley, it's great, but it's Miami and it's Tel Aviv. But you know that innovation doesn't do it by itself. That is, science, technology, education do not produce wealth by themselves. Because if that were the case, then the Soviet Union would have been, the most wealthy country in the world because they had fantastic scientists, mathematicians, physicists, metallurgists. Didn't help, okay? To do that, you have to have free markets. Technology without free markets doesn't take you anywhere. It just makes people migrate to countries with free markets. Free markets and technology can explode, which is what you're seeing here. My mission was to, if my father's generation was to ensure the creation of the Jewish state, my generation's responsibility, as I saw it, was to ensure its future. And the only way you can ensure its future would be to have it powerfully